So good afternoon, everybody. My name's Andrew Gold. I'm the chair of Airedale NHS Foundation Trust, and it's my pleasure to invite you here to this annual members meeting. The meeting, as with the previous year's meeting, is being held virtually because of the COVID restrictions that remain. We do, however, want to make this as interactive as possible and hear your views and questions. And there is a facility for you to raise questions in the sidebar under the icon with the question mark in it. Please do put forward your questions whilst recognising there will be a 20 to 30-second delay in us being able to receive them. But we do welcome those questions and will respond to them. After the annual members meeting, we will be publishing all questions, both those received before the meeting and responses to those, and we will make the slides as well as minutes of the meeting available on our website. Those will be available until the 10th of December, and we do hope that you find those of informative. As we go through this virtual annual members meeting, do please bear with us as we move between slides and people, but I hope you enjoy the event and look forward to hearing your questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. Just to echo Andrew's warm welcome on a pretty wet and dismal Thursday. Thank you for joining us at the annual members meeting. As Andrew said, we will be going through this in a very different way to how we normally do things. Please bear with us if we have any technical difficulties. We'll just have to cover up any long silences, but we will get there. If there's a gap, just bear with us and we'll move on. But we're in the able hands of our colleagues today, so I'm sure it will all go very smoothly. You will hear us say, and I'll be the first to do it. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is who we are. This is Airedale. It's an integrated trust that covers acute and community services. We have 4 hospital sites, but we have 350 beds on our sites. We cover 700 square miles. Our community teams cover a huge geography, and that can't be underestimated. That's an incredible stretch for them, but they do a fantastic job. Our digital footprint stretches from the borders of Morecambe Bay right down to the capital. And again, our colleagues deliver a superb service, but across the country. Our population is of over 200,000. It's diverse at every point, cover a large geographical areas, I've said, from Bingley through to Bentham, out into East Lancashire. We're small, but indeed mighty. And we have nearly 400 volunteers who assist us in the services that we offer. Next slide, please. Okay, what I'm going to show you next is a short film that we delivered in April 2020. Now, just please bear in mind, this was before some of the national restrictions around face masks in the hospital. But we were brave in taking this decision and inviting cameras in. We were one of the first hospitals to do this. But this was in recognition to the experiences our colleagues were facing, which, as you all know now, we've all lived this for 2 years. We've lived through an incredible period, and we wanted to recognise the work that our colleagues were doing in every sector, and indeed the experiences that our patients and their families were going through. Okay, thank you. As I said, that's a video that, in my view, speaks volumes. It's a real credit to our colleagues that they participated in that in the midst of everything else that they were dealing with. But I think the other thing that it draws out is the incredible support we had from our communities. Simply overwhelming. Okay, we probably have just moved on one too many slides. If we could go back one, please. Okay. So in and amongst all of this, there was business as usual, but those numbers that you see, whilst they speak volumes, I think it's important to remember behind every number is a patient, and with every patient is their family or loved one. But we've been operating in an incredibly difficult and different environment to one, I think, as Laura said in the film, that anyone has ever experienced. Nobody has ever been trained in anticipation of what we were dealing with. And it wasn't just the pandemic itself that we were facing. It was having an eye to the recovery period and indeed restarting services. But I think it's important to call out that during the pandemic, our services did continue. As Michael called out in the film, we were a hospital probably of two halves, but actually our emergency care services continued. We actually set up a minor injuries unit whilst we were going through the first wave of the pandemic. We've continued to deliver urgent cancer treatment and surgery. We've still delivered clinically urgent diagnostic testing facilities for patients. Our maternity services have continued. Babies have still been born here at Airedale. We did have to deliver our outpatient services in a very different way, and we did that virtually for the most part, using video and phone technology. And again, that was a credit to our colleagues for taking that forward, but I should also thank our patients and indeed their families for responding so well and so valiantly in that different kind of environment. Our inpatient services continued. So whilst we were overrun at a certain level with our COVID numbers, but we also continued admitting patients who were complex and unwell and needing hospital care. And again, that was a challenge for our colleagues in making sure that they could address both elements of our patient community. And whilst the focus has remained on hospital services, we've been keen, certainly as a board, to acknowledge our community colleagues have also been incredibly stretched and equally put their best foot forward in the first, second, third, and arguably what is now a fourth wave in maintaining care for patients at home and indeed responding to their families. So again, it's a credit to all of our colleagues. Okay, next slide, please, if we can. So our patients, I think to just put some of this in context, our first COVID patient arrived back in the trust in March 2020. But as you know, we've seen numbers rise. We've had a steady state of admissions and hospital inpatient stays for a period of time now. But during the year, we dealt with 890 COVID admissions. We discharged 698 of those patients, but sadly 192 COVID patients did die. I think as we've called out, I've acknowledged, I think we're in an unacknowledged fourth wave, but we've gone through wave 1, wave 2 and wave 3, and we're in a far different position, both as an organisation and I'd argue as a country, from where we were back in March 2020. We've all had to live and adapt with this. And again, our colleagues have been simply phenomenal in how they've responded and how they've learned from this. We did set up a clinical reference group, ably chaired by David Crampsey, our medical director, so that we had the best clinical minds from all professions, analysing data, analysing guidelines, interpreting guidelines to ensure that we were delivering the best possible care that we could. And we've formalised that clinical reference into part of our normal ways of working. That clinical reference group is now part of our everyday governance structure and again continues to be chaired by David. We also set up an acute respiratory care unit, which was set up on Ward 13. This was for the cohort of patients who needed respiratory care at an intensive level, but not at an intensive critical care level. And again, I think it's a credit to the respiratory team and Rob and his operations team for getting that unit set up and indeed maintaining it. Members of our multi-professional teams looked at how we developed those screening tools. We were one of the first in the country to look at how we delivered this. Some of our colleagues in our therapy services have written national articles around how they developed that. And again, this has moved on significantly now that we're in the place that we're in post-March 2020. And we also looked at how we delivered visiting for our families. And I think this has been incredibly challenging. We didn't always get it right, but we delivered a different service for our patients and their families, which was virtual. That was difficult to adjust to for both our patients, their families, and indeed our colleagues. But Amanda and her nursing teams have kept this under review so that we can balance the needs around infection prevention and indeed safety for our visitors and our patients against the needs for compassionate care and for our patients to have access to their loved ones. Okay, next slide, please. And again, following the P's within our strategy, we have remained progressive. I think our team have been pretty dynamic in some of the things that we've done. As the slide calls out, we were the first hospital in Yorkshire to install a surgery facility so we could look at day case surgery, certainly around ophthalmology and cataract. We are looking at whether we can install another surgery facility. It's state of the art, and again, well done to our operational and clinical teams for moving on that as quickly as they did. It's a great facility for patients, and it means that in the context we're operating in now, we can look at the backlog that some of you will have heard about in the media for waiting list admissions. We also developed a one-stop clinic for our children and their families with cerebral palsy. This was to stop those families and those children having to come to multiple clinical appointments, actually getting them seen in one space with a number of professionals. It was a better service for them and their families in what is usually a very distressing and anxious time. We launched the first NHS one-stop upper limb clinic. It does what it says on the tin. This is absolutely about upper limb surgery rehabilitation for folk, but credit to our orthopaedic surgeons, our physiotherapists and our occupational therapists in getting this service up and running, again in the midst of everything else that was taking place. We were one of the first trusts in the north of England to revolutionise how we deliver a biopsy service for gentlemen with prostate cancer. Again, credit to the urology team for taking this forward. They did it in a very understated way. But both Rob and I were incredibly proud to go and look at how this service is delivered and open the urology assessment unit late last year. And notwithstanding that, our pathology services, well, they were under an incredible amount of pressure. I think a lot of the media focus was on frontline services, but in and amongst all of this, some of our background support services, such as pathology, were working hard to be cutting edge, I would argue, in how they delivered testing and screening for COVID. And we were one of the first to deploy the Panther kit, in and amongst all of this. Next slide, please. We wouldn't be anywhere without our people. We are only successful through our colleagues, and they come from far and wide here at Airedale. We have an international community, I would argue. This is how our staff makeup is split. But I think it's important for me to call out here, certainly the film acknowledged our clinical workforce, but certainly what we've been keen to do as a board is acknowledge the contribution of every member of staff across this organisation, wherever they've worked. And I often use the analogy of our health records team, who on day 2, or I think it was day 1 actually, of wave 1, appeared at my office and said, "Where do you want us to work?" Our colleagues across the piece have been, as I think I've used the word phenomenal already, but they really were simply magnificent in the way that they responded. It would be easy just to focus on our clinical colleagues. It would be easy just to focus on those who've been dealing with patients in either the acute end or indeed the critical care end, but patients have been well cared for by our colleagues wherever they've worked. And for those colleagues working in non-patient facing services, they've equally gone above and beyond in everything that they've done. So again, I think it's a thank you to them. I know the country was clapping for NHS workers on a Thursday. That was incredibly important and indeed uplifting for colleagues. But again, we wanted to pay attention to our colleagues in social care, in the local authority, again, across the district, who helped us deliver in the way that we did. Okay, next slide, please. And again, moving on from that, you will have seen that there were significant concerns around whether personal protective equipment was available, but it was here. And I think that's a credit to our colleagues in AG8 Solutions, who ensured that there was appropriate kit available, it was of the right standard, and that we had a plentiful supply. I think they were also keen to work with our colleagues to make sure it wasn't a case of Airedale having kit and others not. We made sure that we offered mutual aid where we could. It was important to consider the experience of our colleagues, who, as I've said, have faced something nobody has ever faced before. And we opened the wellbeing rooms for our colleagues in quieter spaces, just so that they had an opportunity to recharge, to take a moment, to think. And we've been incredibly well supported by our colleagues leading on the Airedale charity and how we've furnished those. And that wellbeing offer is something we need to continue. It's something we talk to our colleagues about so that we can ensure we get it right. We need to be guided by them. And as I said, we're facing something very different now to what we were facing then. Our colleagues in the emergency department were shortlisted for this NHS Parliamentary Award. Huge credit to them. It's the Hearts in Little Hands programme. They were nominated by our local MP, Robbie Moore, and this is a small team who've been led by Dr. Annie Summers in the ED department, who go and teach children, their parents, and indeed their carers CPR and basic life-saving skills. And it was an incredible boost to them to be nominated, and indeed well deserved, I would argue. I've talked about the hospital vaccine centre, but I couldn't talk about it enough, to be honest. We went live on the 11th of January this year, and as the figures say, by the 31st of March, we'd given first vaccinations to over 8,000 people. That was no mean feat. We mobilised that vaccination centre from nothing. And again, our colleagues moved heaven and earth to get everything off the ground. And you'll know now, we've moved on momentously, as we're now looking at family vaccinations for anyone aged over 12. We're delivering booster vaccinations for those who are doubly vaccinated. The vaccine centre, again, just a real credit to them and the folk who got that off the ground. Notwithstanding, we're also delivering flu jabs. It is the flu season, so I will take this opportunity to remind anybody on the call who hasn't yet had a flu jab, if you could get one, it is important, and never more important than this time. As you know, we also like to acknowledge our staff in pre-COVID. We'd like to acknowledge our staff in pre-COVID times, and that's usually through the Pride of Airedale Staff Awards. We couldn't do it in a face-to-face way, so Katie Lister and Jodie Hearnshaw, two of our colleagues in the communications and charitable offices, thought about how we did this through a flash mob kind of mentality. Not something I'd been used to, but basically we ambushed and surprised those winners. And again, it was a real boost for those colleagues, and incredibly well deserved, as those nominations were either from their colleagues or indeed patients. And it would be remiss of me not to call out, but we were actually 50. The hospital reached its 50th year in and amongst all of this. We weren't able to celebrate as Airedale would normally celebrate, but we were incredibly touched to receive a video message from His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, who obviously wasn't able to be here in person due to the reasons we've discussed, but again, real morale boosting for our colleagues. Next slide, please. Airedale is known for its partnership. We will be successful through our continued partnerships, and in amongst all this, the Act as one way that we deliver across the district has gone from strength to strength, and we've continued to participate in that. In that Act as one, as I've said, we've worked with our local authority, our clinical commissioning colleagues, our colleagues at Bradford Teaching Hospitals, and indeed the Care Trust, and our education colleagues to think about how we can truly do things in one way that is better for the communities that we serve. And I can't thank, if I think about some of our university colleagues and the support they gave us, certainly in 2020, credit to them. I think they were facing a very difficult situation, but put themselves in our shoes and thought about the colleagues that we were working with and how could they best support them. As you would expect, we were in a command and control situation, but again, we worked in partnership with our colleagues in the West Yorkshire Association of Acute Trusts to take that forward. I think that moved into how we worked across the vaccine programmes. And I've alluded to our colleagues in the telemedicine service and the digital hub, but again, they worked with our GP colleagues, our primary care colleagues, to think about how we could deliver services differently and how we could truly give a wraparound to patients in their own homes who were isolated, self-isolating, and facing an incredibly difficult situation. So again, it's a credit to our colleagues who thought about how they could do things differently. And I think the last point probably on the slide deck captures where we all are today. We adapted quickly to Zoom and MS Teams and working virtually. Who knew this is how we'd all be working? Who knew that "you're on mute" or "next slide please" would be the most common sentences ever used in the English language? Next slide, please. Okay, these are the people who helped us. If I just call it, I'm not going to go through them all, but if I think of on the top left, Amelia, age 6, who organised a sponsored litter pick in aid of a hospital charity. Look, the donations from communities and individuals across the district who donated drinks for our colleagues who were delivering care in PPE, as you saw. They thought about what experience and what environment they were offering, what they were working in, and offered drinks and refreshments. so that those colleagues had a different experience certainly during the hot days. Gigglewitz School provided gift packs for our intensive care staff, and it would be remiss of me not to discuss the huge volume of Easter eggs that we received. I think at last count there were over 14,000, but again that just signifies how well this organisation was supported by its community. In and amongst this, we did put up the plaque to Captain Sir Tom Moore as a local Keighley man. Again, we just wanted to acknowledge the significant impact he'd had for the NHS and the NHS charities, and we thought we were touched to receive the plaque in commemoration of his services. Next slide, please. And then these are the people who really count. These are the people who've delivered care. And I won't go into each and every one of them, but these are the people who've won awards and have been nominated by either their colleagues or indeed their patients. Kay Green from the Airedale Collaborative team, who was nominated as Leader of the Year. Sharon Henderson from Physiotherapy, she's there, top left with the winner star sign. She went above and beyond and took herself off to be trained in delivering sign language, and then taught every other colleague in her department, all off her own back. The AGX Domestics team, who were nominated as Team of the Year, and a special call out to Janet Wilson, who's in the middle in the green, who was the Volunteer of the Year. Everyone a winner on there. There's several I haven't mentioned, but these are the people who have really gone above and beyond and continue to go above and beyond. And it would be remiss of us not to mention them. So thank you to everybody. If we were in a lecture theatre now, I think they would receive a standing ovation. Next slide, please. So I'll draw to a close. We're going to hand over to Amy, Gareth and Karen before Rob takes us forward to look at what we're going to be doing during the next year. But it's important to just draw this back to where we've been. Our focus will be on winter. We're already in a level of winter pressures that you will have seen across the national headlines. It's been like that for a period of time, but we want to ensure that within winter, our colleagues and our patients get the best possible experience that they can. How do we deliver our services now as a business as usual kind of activity, alongside the fact that we are still in the midst of a global pandemic? We've been looking at how we tackle the waiting times that you will have seen across the country. We've had an eye to this from the minute the COVID pandemic hit us. We were looking about how we were going to recover from this, and Stuart Shaw kindly led that piece of work alongside Amy. We will continue to look at our colleagues' wellbeing and resilience. It's absolutely important that it's our people who see us through this, and therefore we need to see them through it. And there's more to follow on some of the exciting capital works and developments that we will be seeing here at Airedale. So I'll take a breath and say thank you very much, and hand you over to Amy.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Amy Whittaker, Executive Director of Finance here at Airedale. I've been made aware there might be a little gremlin in the system, which means that you can't see me, but I'm hoping you can all hear me loud and clear. So I'm going to take the next couple of minutes just talking you through our annual accounts from 2020-21. So next slide, please. Thank you. So starting with headlines. So our 2021 position is a deficit of 21 million, just under. This may sound alarming, but it is due to a technical impairment of our buildings of 24 million, which I'm going to talk a bit more about on the next slide. Therefore, our underlying position, excluding that technical adjustment, is a surplus of 3.4 million, which is the equivalent of 1.5% of our total income. COVID-19 clearly drove, as you've heard lots about from Brendan already, a very significant change for all of us, and that was included in our finances during the 2020-21 financial year. We saw significantly increased costs and a change in the way we received our income. So out of our total income, 13.5 million was received to offset COVID-19 expenditure and to reimburse us for any lost income during that financial year. And we ended the year with really strong cash balances of just over 26 million. Overall, our accounts were audited with an unqualified opinion, which is obviously where we'd want to be. However, I just want to draw out that our external auditor will be bringing to your attention that there was an emphasis of matter drawn out in our accounts. This emphasis of matter is aligned to the significant impairment that I've just described, and due to its materiality, the auditor's judgment is that it is such of importance to any reader of the accounts in order to support their understanding that it needs drawing out. Clearly, the Trust welcome this addition and agrees with it, and our auditors will give a bit more detail about this later. Next slide, please. So our impairment of buildings, to provide a bit more detail on the 24 million impairment that we've seen in the 2021 accounts, I think it's important to say that this judgment was the most material aspect of the audit for 2021. And so you're going to hear some of this repeated in the external auditors section as well. What I just wanted to do is give you a quick summary of what this impairment means and what impact this has had on our accounts. So our estate was revalued in 2021 as part of a normal annual process. We do this every year where we'd review our valuations and ensure that our accounts are accurately reflecting the true and fair value of our estate. In this financial year, the valuation has resulted in a total reduced value, which is otherwise known as an impairment, of 30 million. 24 million of this was charged to our income and expenditure, which has therefore led to the reported deficit in our accounts, and 6 million of it was charged to our evaluation reserve, which is where balances from previous upward valuations were held. This revaluation is largely caused by a reduction in the remaining life of the buildings because of issues with the construction. So you'll hear a lot as we move on about RAC, and that's reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete. So if you've been following the hospital for some time now, you'll know that we are one of the hospitals that is constructed primarily from RAC, which means we're going to need a plan in place to replace our hospital, and it leads to our current estate having a shorter life than we had originally accounted for. The reduction in the life of the building is what has led to that impairment that we're seeing in the accounts, and more about our future plans in this regard will come later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So I'm coming on to the income and expenditure focus now. So to provide an overview of what this is showing us and to also compare it to previous years. So you will see that we've seen significant increases in income and expenditure driven by the COVID response, but overall our operating surplus has improved. So within the 3.4 million operating surplus, we had donations of 400,000. Therefore, we exclude that to give our true underlying performance, which was a £3 million surplus. You can then see that this operating surplus has the impairment applied to it, which results in the reported 20.8 million deficit that you'll be seeing in the accounts. Next slide, please. Okay, so as already mentioned, we received an additional 13.5 million of income in 2021 to cover COVID-19 costs and to reimburse for lost income due to the pandemic. In addition, central government donated 3.5 million of PPE and 400,000 of ventilators and other equipment. And as would be expected, the majority of our income, so 81%, continues to come from our NHS commissioners. So although our activity was different to previous years, our commissioners continue to fund historic levels of income on a fixed income contract during this financial year to ensure stability as we manage the pandemic. And you can see that the majority of our income continued to come from our local commissioner, Bradford. It was 71% of our income in 2021, which is more significant than usual, and it's due to the fixed income contracts that we were on. Next slide, please. So how do we spend our money? We can see from this slide that for every pound that's spent with the trust, 65p, so 65% funds our people. Drugs and clinical non-pay makes up a further 13p, with 22p of every pound being on infrastructure. In this financial year, we've also spent 7.5 million on COVID spend, of which 4.2 million, so 56%, was related to the additional costs of staffing. So primarily the bulk of the additional spend was related to our people. Next slide, please. So what about our capital resources? So things have changed slightly, that we're now subject to a capital limit which is set at regional ICS level, which is West Yorkshire for us. We got agreed a capital budget of 11.2 million for 2021, and as the year progressed, some providers were unable to spend all of their capital allocation, which gave opportunities for some of us to spend more. We were able to agree to support that by bringing forward 850,000 of IT equipment, which resulted in an in-year overspend that was agreed at ICS level of 850,000. Clearly, this was great news for the Trust, as it got us ahead on our IT spend for this financial year and put us in a good place. Overall on capital, we spent 5.6 million more than we had in previous years, so which you can imagine at the same time as managing COVID and the various supply issues that arose from that is a significant achievement for all of the teams involved, something that we're very proud of. Next slide, please. So this slide just gives some an overlook of some of the significant areas of capital spend. So you can see that we had a lot more PDC funded capital. What I mean by that is centrally funded capital. So we received a lot more nationally this year than we have done previously. This included 1.5 million of COVID capital, 1.7 million to support critical backlog maintenance, 1.3 million additional IT and 900,000 of medical equipment. This was delivered on top of our original capital plan, so represented a 93% uplift on our normal spend. So as I've already said, a real achievement for us in that financial year. Next slide. Thank you. So moving on to our forward look. So the financial framework for the current year continues to build on a West Yorkshire system-based approach to funding and planning. We have developed a balanced plan for 21-22. We have continued to be funded differently in this financial year to previous financial years, and we have had our funding split into two halves of the year. In the first half of the year, we received our income on a fixed income funding arrangement, similar to 2020-21, and it was based on our costs in the previous year plus a 0.5% uplift. On top of that, we have access to a separate elective recovery fund, which is to enable us to cover costs that are aligned to recovering our activity back to what is perceived as our normal levels and reflects normally about 90% of our 2019-20 activity levels. We do have more clarity now on the second half of the year, so October 21 to March 22, and that is going to operate in a very similar way where we will have a fixed income contract. The difference is being now that we will have an increased efficiency asked in the second half of the year, and we will continue to be able to access further spend regarding our elective recovery, as well as some additional monies related to dealing with some of the winter pressures that we may face and are facing. Next slide, please. So we'll obviously continue to progress our work across the Bradford and Craven Place and our West Yorkshire system as part of our commitment to system leadership. We're going to continue to be a strong partner in the West Yorkshire Capital Planning Forums to ensure that we have an opportunity to influence. Clearly, a significant part of our work is going to be around managing the issues aligned to RAC. We have a 15 million commitment to the removal and mitigation of RAC in this financial year, which we are progressing at pace. And we will continue to put ourselves in the best place as we can to progress national financial support for replacement estate. Next slide, please. So just to conclude from me, we continue as a board to be committed to ensuring short-term financial decision-making does not lead to any unexpected long-term challenges. We are committed to deliver efficiency improvements to ensure that the long-term sustainability of the Trust is maintained. And clearly, it's key for us that we pursue capital funding to replace and upgrade the ageing hospital buildings to alleviate the RAC issues that I've talked about. So that's all from me now. I'm going to pass you over to Gareth Mills from External Audit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy, and good afternoon, everybody. My name's Gareth Mills and I'm a director from Grant Thornton. We're the external auditors to the Trust, and it's my role to lead our audit team and issue the annual opinion on your accounts. Next slide, please. So, for those of you familiar with this presentation from previous years, I've pulled together a brief presentation that firstly sets out in high-level terms the work of external audit in the NHS, to help just give a bit of background to the work that we do. And then the second part of the presentation is to draw out sort of the key findings from our audit of the 2021 accounts, and then the additional piece of work that we do around our assessment of the Trust's use of its resources. Next slide, please. So what is the role of external audit? Well, ultimately, it's to provide you as members and governors independent assurance over the Trust's annual accounts, giving a view as to whether they show a true and fair view of the assets and liabilities at the 31st of March year end. And in addition, in the public sector, we also have a commentary on the Trust's arrangements for the use of its resources. Now, as external auditors within the public sector, we do have some additional special reporting powers that we can issue in with local authorities and NHS bodies. So if there was a particular area of significant concern where we felt that the board weren't actively managing it, we can make a referral to NHS IE, or we can issue a report in the public interest. Just to be very clear, we've not done anything of that nature at Airedale in respect of 2021 or previously, but we do have those powers if necessary. Next slide, please. So in terms of how we perform our role, I mean, I very much see it as a year-round relationship with my clients. So myself and key members of my team will meet on a regular basis with Amy and key members of the finance team, and obviously we attend and contribute at each of the quarterly audit committee meetings, and that relationship does take place throughout the full 12 months. So early in the new year, sort of January to March time, we'll be doing a lot of our audit planning and interim work. We'll issue our audit plan to the audit committee, and then the real sort of detailed year-end work on your annual accounts will typically take place from the end of April through to the end of June, and that culminates in our key report to the audit committee, which is called the ISA 260 Audit Findings Report. And then this year there was a new requirement with a slightly changed criteria for auditors, which was to issue an auditor's annual report by the middle of September that set out the detailed work that we'd done in respect of assessing your arrangements for use of resources and value for money. So a real sort of year-round relationship with Airedale. Next slide, please. So in terms of who considers our work, I guess our primary relationship is through the Trust's Audit Committee, which is obviously chaired and led by the non-exec directors. So they see all our audit reports throughout the year, key documents such as our audit plan at the start of the year. They also assess our performance, whether they feel we're giving a robust and independent form of external audit. And that independence point is really key because obviously in the current climate, it's really important that external auditors can demonstrate that independence to be able to give an objective view on your accounts and your governance arrangements, and we confirm that through the audit committee. We then have the board, who obviously ultimately approve the audited accounts, and they act on any audit recommendations that we raise. We've got a relationship with the Council of Governors, so obviously on an annual basis I present back to the annual members meeting, but you've also got powers around appointing or removing the external auditor. And again, if I felt there was a significant issue that management weren't dealing with in an appropriate way, you know, it would be within my rights to go straight to the Council of Governors and raise those concerns, but again not had requirement to do that at Airedale. And you would also be able to approve any non-audit work that we deliver at Airedale. And again, just to be really clear, we've not delivered any non-audit or what's sometimes called advisory or consultancy type work at Airedale. Our engagement with you is purely in terms of auditing your annual accounts. And then ultimately, as the regulator, NHSIE, they receive a copy of all our key documents. So they get our ISA 260 report at the end of June. They also got our report on your VFM arrangements in the middle of September. And again, they would receive any referrals or public interest reports that we issue. But again, just to be clear, we've not done that at Airedale. Next slide, please. So now we move into the second part of the presentation, and this is where I've just highlighted some key messages in terms of the two areas of our audit work. Firstly, on this slide, in terms of the key matters that came out of our accounts audit. So some of this Amy's already touched on, but the key point to report back to you as members is that I issued a clean, unqualified audit opinion at the end of June this year. I mentioned before we've got a regular dialogue with Amy and her team, and they provide us with obviously the supporting working papers and audit trail in order for us to be able to perform our audit work. And we've come to expect over the sort of 3 years that I've been involved with Airedale, a good level of engagement from Amy's team and a good quality in terms of the audit working papers that are provided to us. So that's good to see that. I guess the finance team and management take the pride in producing the accounts and see some real value in terms of the audit process. Other key points to note: there were no major weaknesses in financial systems, and we didn't identify any audit adjustments that impacted on the draft reported numbers. However, as ever within any sort of external audit, there were a small number of presentational adjustments that we discussed with Amy and the team and the audit committee, and they were agreed and processed before the final signed version of accounts were produced at the end of June. In terms of key issues arising, well, clearly the RAC issue dominated this year's accounts and audit process. So conversations with Amy and her colleagues commenced around about this time last year, and those conversations went on throughout the audit process. Because of the significance of that 30 million reduction in value, our materiality, so the sort of key figure that we work around is around £3 million at Airedale, so it was sort of 10 times the value of that. So it was really significant in the context of Airedale's audit. So it was really important that both management got this accounted for appropriately and that we did appropriate level of audit work on it. And I obviously engaged some of our technical people centrally at Grant Thornton as well, to make sure that we were all comfortable with how that impairment was treated, and ultimately that was the case. And as Amy also said, whilst our accounts opinion was an unqualified clean one, which is the opinion that clients would want in terms of a clean bill of health on the accounts, because of the significance of that 30 million, of which 24 of it went through the income and expenditure account, I thought that was significant enough to draw out as an emphasis of matter within my audit opinion, just to highlight to readers of the annual accounts the importance of that particular impairment. Next slide, please. So in public sector external audit, alongside the annual accounts, we also do a review of use of resources, or what's sometimes known as the value for money arrangements review. And this year, whilst we've done a value for money arrangements review for a number of years now in the public sector, the criteria and guidance from the National Audit Office, the NAO, it changed for 2021. So it was a new sort of approach that focused auditors' work on 3 particular criteria at an organisation. Those were financial sustainability, governance arrangements, and arrangements to improve economy, efficiency and effectiveness, sometimes known as the 3 E's. So looking at your service delivery, your performance and outcomes, and how you were performing against your key objectives. So interesting piece of work. It was a piece of work that involved engaging with people outside of Amy's team. So typically, this type of work was really focused on just on the finances in the past, whereas this time it was engaging sort of wider aspects of the trust performance. Ultimately, in terms of key messages for you as members, we didn't identify any significant weaknesses in the trust arrangements. So again, that's a really positive outcome for Airedale. And a question I'm often asked by non-exec director colleagues that at the audit committee is, how does that compare to your other NHS organisations? And I would say we found fewer issues at Airedale compared to most of my other acute NHS clients. Next slide, please. So in terms of some of the detail on that use resources VFM work, obviously you did deliver a surplus position. So the 3 million that Amy talked about earlier, if you discount the 24 million impairment, which is not recognised in terms of your actual performance by your regulator, you did deliver a 3 million surplus position. In addition, you planned ahead for the 21-22 year for the full year, which wasn't universally done across the NHS sector from from my perspective of other clients and speaking to wider colleagues, whereas you did do a full sort of plan for both the first and second half of 2021. It was clear there was a lot of engagement and participation in terms of your partnership working, which Brendan spoke about earlier. Established governance arrangements in place, and I think that helped in terms of how you as a trust dealt with some of the challenges arising from the impact of COVID-19, which again have been touched on earlier in this session, and things from our perspective in terms of the operation of the audit committee. That continued throughout the last 18 months. It's been done virtually, and from my point of view, the quality of debate and discussion, if anything, has slightly been enhanced by doing that remotely. And there were no major issues arising from the work done by the trust internal auditors or the counter fraud specialist. And again, we engage with those as sort of other members of the audit assurance group of people that are all working in respect of the Airedale audit. So in terms of the key challenges from our perspective, and again, these won't come as a surprise to anyone, it's around that management and delivery of the RAC restoration and capital work on the estates. Clearly, it's a critical financial and operational project. The trust obviously fully acknowledges and is aware of that and is actively managing it, and that's an ongoing area that we will be focusing on as part of our 21-22 audit, and it obviously is a standing item on the agenda when I meet with Amy and her team. Next slide, please. So I think hopefully that's a helpful summary in terms of the work that we do as external auditors to the trust, and in terms of some of the key messages coming out of our 2021 audit work across accounts and VFM. I'll pause at this point. I know that there's going to be time for questions at the end in terms of overall trust related questions, but if there are any questions specifically in relation to the 2021 audit work, I'll just pause at that point to see if anyone has any, and I will endeavour to try and answer them. And thank you very much.
Looks like you've been let off the hook there.
That's fine, Carol. Thanks all for listening, and hope the rest of the meeting goes well.
Thank you. Hi everybody, my name's Karen Ellison and I'm the lead governor for the Council of Governors at Airedale. I'm going to run through the membership report, which is one of my statutory duties, and this report has to be given at every annual members meeting. Hopefully that'll give you a flavour of what the Council of Governors has been doing to engage you, our members, and other members of the public during the pandemic. This slide is quite old, but it gives you a pictorial representation of you, of the public governors at Airedale, and it was relevant up until the end of May 2021. The council's made up of 12 publicly elected governors. There's 4 governors drawn from the local councils and the voluntary sector, and 4 governors represent the hospital staff. Having governors from these different backgrounds means we have a good mix of experience, which helps us in our holding to account duties. Last year, unfortunately, the Council of Governors had to take the decision to postpone the elections that were due to occur in spring of 2021, as the pandemic curtailed our ability to effectively reach out to the local community regarding governor opportunities. Consequently, as of the 1st of June 2021, the terms of office of 4 of our governors ended, but I'm pleased to say that these governors have continued to attend and observe Council of Governors meetings, and these are Michael Smith, John Bootland, Paul Maskell and Jerry Stanford, and I'm very thankful to them and for their contribution over the year. Since this slide was produced, we've also got 2 new stakeholder governors. So Jennifer Purcell has superseded Councillor Tom Witt for the Pendle Borough Council, and we've also got a new governor for the voluntary sector in Manaz Khan. Next slide, please. What have been our activities during the last 12 months? Well, obviously they've been curtailed a bit because of the pandemic, as you can imagine. We have obviously continued to hold the non-executive directors to account through regular meetings, which have been captured on this slide. We've also been kept abreast of national planning requirements by the board and the non-execs. We've continued to take part in the chair and the non-executive director appraisal process. We had to make certain changes to the constitution, none of which affect the members, so I'm not going to go into that in detail. Obviously, we didn't have the chance to meet up with our members or to talk to patients in the outpatient department because of COVID, and we're hoping to re-establish that once the pandemic is under control, if ever. We've been inviting feedback from you, our members, through other channels, so particularly social media, and we get the odd email from members talking about their experiences of life at Airedale as a visitor or as a patient. Next slide, please. So I'm going to move on to some numbers now, just to sort of explain how the membership is made up. And these slides will represent what the membership actually looks like. So of the 31st of March, which was year end, we had 10,770 public members, which is about 140 less than last year. And we do want to build on that membership number, and we'll need your help to do that. If you know anyone that might want to become a member of the Trust, please tell them to get in touch with the membership office here at the Trust, and any of the governors will be pleased to take questions about that too. Our membership strategy continues an objective to develop the representativeness of the membership, and this slide shows the representativeness in terms of ethnicity. You can see the numbers there, but I think what would probably strike you is the huge number of white members who describe themselves as white. So that's a total of 8,355 members, representing 78% of our total membership. Within our district, 90% of people would describe themselves as white. So it's probably a little bit out, but not too far from the norm. 76 describe themselves as mixed race, which is less than 1% against a district average of 1%, so equivalent. There's 1,013 describe themselves as Asian or Asian birth, which is 9% of our membership against a district average of 2%. 63 describe themselves as Black or Black British, so that's just under 1% of our membership, with a district average of less than 0.5%. And similarly, 22 are described as another ethnic group, which is also just under 1%, with a district average of less than 0.5%. We also do not have ethnicity details for 1,241 members, which represents 12% of our membership. I think when you look at this, it probably shows that our ethnicity data does represent what's happening in our population. Next slide, please. So, excuse me, I've got a bit of a chest infection. Our public membership by age is demonstrated in this next slide. From the age of 14, we invite members to become members of the Trust. We've got 2 members in that age bracket. But we've got a total of 182 in our younger member, which is 14 to 21 bracket. You'll see that the majority of our members are in the 22 to 29 bracket, and more so in the 60 plus age bracket, and this may represent when members are mostly needing our help. But there's a fairly even distribution between the ages of 30 and 59. We also have high numbers of members that haven't disclosed their age to us, so 1,021 didn't state their age. The majority of people, so 19% in the district, are aged 60 to 74. There's a relatively even split across the district in other age groups, with those people in the 22 to 29 age group a minority, and probably that represents the fact that actually that age group don't really need the hospital much. So in terms of age, we differ a bit when compared to the district, but not overly. Next slide, please. So this is our membership by gender. Probably no surprise, it wasn't a surprise to me to know that the majority are female, so 64% of our membership are female. A small number, 34, haven't told us that the gender they identify with. And from the data available to us regarding the gender base in the district, there's a relatively even split between male and female. So we seem to be attracting the ladies, but not the men, and that may relate to women's issues in health, I don't know, pregnancy, gynecology maybe. Next slide, please. So our membership numbers, I'm not going to read all of this out, but you can see how many members we have in each of our districts. So it was accurate at 31st of March 21. It may have altered somewhat during that time, but the majority of our members, you can see, live in Keighley, Skipton and the rest of England. Rest of England you might feel is strange, but that represents any area not within the constituency area stipulated in this table. So there may be some people that are very close to the border and join as a Rest of England member because they're not strictly within catchment area. Next slide, please. So what are our priorities coming up? They have to align with the trust-wide engagement strategy, obviously. They focus on several things. A representative membership is the first thing. Recruitment of people that have an interest in healthcare to become members of the trust, and that was my prime reason for joining originally as a member and then as a governor, because I spent 25 years in the health service. We want to engage the membership about the trust plans and services and ensure we engage in an effective way, and I'm sure that you all agree that it's an exciting time for the trust, particularly if we get the new building funding off the ground. Our ability to recruit new members was and continues to be quite difficult during COVID and curtailed somewhat because we can't go out to our communities. But we'll get there, I think, once it's calmed down a bit. We've developed a plan of activities in support of these priorities, and we'll resume as many activities as possible in the near future because that's quite a fun bit of being a governor. Next slide, please. This shows you a pictorial representation of how you, our members, and how the public can engage with the governors. So we go out, we obtain the views of the members and the public. That might be from patient participation groups or social media or personal emails. From those views, we would look at questions at the governor-only meetings, thinking how can we put these questions to the non-executive directors. We would then ask those questions of the non-executive directors at the Council of Governor meetings, and then feedback any response to the public and the members of the organisation. Next slide, please. What have we been doing so far this year? Well, meeting virtually, learning about Teams. We've got some members of our governing body are new to IT, so some of that's been a bit of a challenge. But what we have done is continue to hold the council and gig meetings virtually. We've had monthly informal governor briefings with the executives and non-executive, and that has been incredibly useful. So we've been on top of what the trust has been about for the last year and the difficulties that they've faced. We've participated in staff video briefings, so that I think it's great to see that the trust had staff briefings very, very regularly during the pandemic, and they were, I'm sure, very well received by the staff and very well received by those governors that were able to attend. We've shared information with members on the current work of the Trust via social media and on our membership website, and we've continued to observe the board and the committee meetings virtually. So I think despite all the challenges, we've had a really good year and want to build on more of the same next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Karen. Next slide, please. So some of you may have seen in the local press recently that Brendan Brown, our Chief Executive, leaves us at the end of this year to join Calderdale and Huddersfield as their Chief Executive. So they're a bigger and more complex organisation. So credit to Brendan for the fantastic work that he's done here in the last 3.5 years as our Chief Executive. In particular, what Brendan has done is left a very strong and resilient trust with a very capable leadership team in place. And it was for that reason that we were able to put in place arrangements from within that team from when Brendan leaves us at the end of this year. So from the 1st of January, Rob Aitchison, who's currently Chief Operating Officer, will become the Acting Chief Executive. Vicky Pickles, who's currently Director of Corporate Affairs and Deputy Chief Executive Officer, will become the Acting Full-Time Deputy Chief Executive Officer. And Stuart Shaw, who's currently our Director of Strategy and Planning, will be Acting Chief Operating Officer, taking on Rob's existing duties. It's from the heart that all of us wish Brendan the best of luck in his new role and thank him for everything he's done at Airedale. And I'm sure there'll be lots of other opportunities to say our farewells to Brendan, but at this annual members meeting, we wanted to make that a matter of public record. So with that backdrop of those impending leadership changes, I now ask Rob Aitchison, the Chief Operating Officer, to take us through the final agenda item, looking to the future.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. So I've just got 5 or 6 slides now that I'm just going to talk you all through in terms of what the next 6 to 12 months has in store for us. As Andrew has described, Brendan will leave us in the new year and he's going to be really missed by all of us. However, myself, Vicky and the director team will all be continuing the excellent work that Brendan's led while he's been at the Trust. So in terms of the next 6 to 12 months then, I think it's just important that we start focusing on, first of all, focusing on the well-being and resilience of our people. So we've had an 18 months like no other ever before. We couldn't be prouder of our teams. They've done an absolutely fantastic job and they continue to do a great job for our patients. But it's going to be really, really important that our people, our teams are at the front and centre of everything that we're doing for the next 6 to 12 months. So everything we do will be focused around that. We'll need to continue to support them as we enter a really challenging period on top of what's already been a tricky period over the last 18 months. So in terms of what to expect during the next 6 to 12 months, we have got ongoing pressures in relation to COVID. I think as Karen mentioned earlier, we're going to have to live with a level of COVID in our society and in our hospital, I think, for the foreseeable future. So we're currently dealing with anywhere between 5 and 10% of our bed base in the hospital. Those are patients who have a COVID diagnosis. So we're going to have to continue to run the hospital dealing with a mixture of pathways and a mixture of complexity. So clearly that has some implications for our teams and also in how we plan our services around those needs. So that's obviously going to be at the front of our thinking for the next 6 to 12 months. We're also entering a period that we come to traditionally call in our winter period in the NHS. We have had levels of activity within the hospital which have been above previous levels now for the last 6 to 12 months. We had a very quiet period when the country was in lockdown and we saw fewer patients through our services. But for 12 months plus now, we've seen higher levels than we would have expected to see previously across all of our different service points of delivery. That applies at the front end of the hospital, but it also equally applies within our community teams and the services that provide that care across our population. So it's going to be really important that we continue to put plans in place to support our populations. We continue to signpost them to the most appropriate services for them, and that we continue to deal with that kind of breadth of activity that we're looking at. So it's appropriate to talk about elective activity at that point. we have higher numbers of patients currently waiting for care than we have had in previous years. However, we made some significant progress in reducing the amount of waits that our patients have. So we're reducing the number of patients that have waited longer than a year, and we have a small number of patients now, the smallest number of patients we had waiting over 2 years. We'll be looking by the end of 21-22 to reduce the number of patients waiting beyond 2 years to 0, and to further reduce the number of patients waiting more than 1 year. Lots and lots of activity going on at the moment, and some of the updates that I will give in a second will give a little bit of a flavour of some of the positive news to come on that subject. In terms of digitisation of patient records, this is effectively how we communicate and record clinical outcomes for patients, but equally it's about how we communicate across our teams. So we currently have a system which is partly digitised. The recent arrival of Paul Rice within the trust as our digital director has really helped accelerate some of the work we're doing to digitise our records across the hospital. So the next 6 to 12 months will see us progressing that further, and we would hope to look to implement a full digital record into the hospital within the next couple of years. We're working with local partners on that, and we hope to kind of gain some of the experience that they've had in previous years through doing that. We continue to go from strength to strength, working with our partners. So everything that we do is across all of our strategies, working in partnership with our population and the people who are providing services around us. Actors 1 is the banner under which we're doing that within our population. We have 6 work streams that we will continue to develop during the next 12 months. We're already starting to see some fantastic outcomes and outputs of that programme, and we'll be building on that during the next 12 months. Further to that, in terms of partnership, as you'll see, you'll all have seen lots and lots of reconfiguration and changes within the NHS at the moment. We're a really key part of those changes, so we'll continue to build on our involvement as the ICS develops, the integrated care system, and also our local arrangements within our place across Bradford District and Craven. So lots of exciting developments there during the next 6 months. And I'll just lead you on to the estates developments now. So lots of very exciting buildings and developments. Obviously, those buildings are just a part of it. It's what happens in those buildings and how we use them to deliver great care for our population. But we're very, very excited with the amount and the breadth of what's happening here at Airedale at the moment. So next slide, please. So Brian, thank you for your question. You've asked a question regarding the £2 million capital spend in relation to theatres. That's actually part year effect of the significant amount of building that we've actually made with regards to our theatres. So there's a spend of around £8 million on our new theatres. This is a really exciting development for Airedale. So we're already a fantastic deliverer of elective activity, and we're building on what we currently do by putting these new theatres in place. So as you drive down the hospital site, if you drive down the right hand side towards our A&E, you will see a fantastic new building, which is going to be our new theatres. So within those theatres, there are going to be 2 new theatres, which are called barn theatres. So it's quite a modern kind of method of delivering theatre capacity. So the teams will be able to work across 2 operating spaces. And in addition, there will be an ophthalmic theatre as well. This is going to boost our capacity by somewhere in the region of 30% for the elective activity that we provide here. It will also really mean that Airedale punches slightly above its weight, I would say, in terms of the elective activity, the volume and the complexity of what we do on our site here. We will become quite quickly quite a large provider of orthopaedic activity. So you can see within the slide here, it describes the hip and knee replacements, the growth in that activity, and it will also mean that we recruit additional surgeons within Airedale, and it'll actually become quite an attractive thing for people to come and work with the trust here because of the size and the scale of what we're doing. So that's a fantastic, really exciting. We hope to have those theatres up and running as we head into the financial year 2022. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to talk in a little bit more detail about some of the fantastic developments we've had here. So we're really pleased to secure £15 million national funding to develop a new facility that will be the home for our intensive care unit, as well as providing a 30-bedded ward. So you'll have seen on the video at the beginning, some of our colleagues from intensive care providing some comments and some kind of reflections on providing care during the COVID pandemic. This is going to be a really fantastic positive for them in terms of the facilities that they'll be working within and what this will give them to care for their patients. The new facility is built using modern methods of construction, which is a more environmentally friendly process than a traditional build, and it means that we can work at significant pace. So this whole project from start to finish will be completed in 9 months, which is a really, really great achievement. The ICU, as I say, will give a better environment for our patients, their relatives and our staff. I just want to note here the significant support that we've had from charity on this. So the facility will have a relatives room, new furniture and soft furnishings to provide comfort at a really difficult time. And like I say, a lot of this is testament to our charity here at Airedale, who've supported some of this development. The new facility will be co-located near our A&E and our acute assessment unit and our operating theatres, which will mean that we're providing the best outcomes for our patients in having that co-location. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to touch on another really positive kind of building project and development here at Airedale. So we've been in recent conversations with a number of stakeholders, including the Help charity, who are a national organisation, and also our local charity here within the organisation, and Yorkshire Air Ambulance and Northwest Air Ambulance and Embrace, who are a provider and a facilitator of paediatric transfers for those people who are sickest, who are needing immediate support. We're just awaiting our planning application, the outcome of that, and we're hoping to start work on this helipad to finish in autumn 2022. We currently receive patients by air ambulance into the organisation, and you can see on the left-hand side there, that's pretty much where the helicopter lands within one of our nearby fields. This heli deck will allow us to do much more. We'll be able to support more patients directly at Airedale who are coming from that, particularly from that North Yorkshire area, without the need for them to be bypassed to other organisations. So again, it's a significant development for our trust. I think it's building on those core principles and those things that we do so well here at Airedale. And I should just say also, it's very, very well supported by our clinical team. So we've had significant engagement from our teams here who are really keen for us to develop this initiative. And I think it'd be a great thing for our population in doing this. Thank you. Next slide, please. And really, last but certainly not least, there are some fairly big plans at the moment for Airedale. Amy talked earlier about the RAC issues within the hospital. That's the main driving force behind our regeneration of the estate at the moment, but by no means is the only reason we're doing this. I think we all believe this is a real once-in-a-generation opportunity to develop the Airedale site, to invest in our local services, to make sure that we can meet those immediate challenges that the hospital is facing, but also to develop on a range of other government strategies and priorities. So our ambition for Airedale Hospital will mean that we want to be Europe's first carbon neutral hospital. We want to create an environment that will be digitally enabled, and both within the hospital and in our community teams as well, with full digital infrastructure capabilities on our site. This will be a place where we want everybody to come. So we're already focused on making sure that the hospital is a welcoming environment for our populations, but we want to go further with that in doing more. So as we work through these coming months, we want more people to coming onto the site. We have plans to develop a local farm on the hospital site as well through partnership with other providers. And we think there's lots more that we can do to become, as I say, that carbon neutral hospital. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so our next steps in relation to this. We've submitted an expression of interest to the new hospitals programme, and that expression of interest went in September 2021. We're expecting to hear back before Christmas whether our bid has been shortlisted. But in the meantime, we're forging ahead with lots of things anyway, lots of innovation and lots of developments. I think we've talked about most of these already. I will just highlight the paediatric play area train. So earlier in the year, we were really lucky and grateful to receive a PACER train. The PACER train was delivered to the site here. We secured that through a national competition, and we're going to be using that as an area for patients who are here at the hospital to get into and have a look at. And yeah, I've just mentioned the farm earlier. So this community farm that we're providing at the moment, or hoping to provide in partnership with the local voluntary organisation Project 6, and we hope to have that up and running by spring 22. So I hope you get a sense of just the amount of things and the breadth of things that are happening at the moment, and we look forward to building on those as we head into this next year. Okay, thank you, and that's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, so this takes us to the part of the agenda where we invite questions. So first of all, I'd open this session by saying if you've got any questions to raise on things that you've heard, or indeed things that you haven't heard, please do start typing in those questions. We did receive some questions in advance of this meeting, so what I'm going to do is intersperse between those questions and the questions that you'll see published down the sidebar. So the first three questions that we're going to respond to are from Pauline Sharp, which I'll respond to. Then I'm going to ask Amanda Stanford, our Director of Nursing, to respond to Peter Emsley's question. And then I'm going to ask Brendan Brown, our Chief Executive, to respond to a question from Ian Barlow. So first of all, Pauline Sharp. Thank you, Pauline, for your question. I won't read all the question, although we will publish all the question. But in essence, the thrust of your question was that last year at the annual members meeting, you asked on behalf of yourself and others about improving communication between the Council of Governors and members. So really great question. I remember it, and indeed I remember agreeing with you that communication remains critical. I think we'd all agree that throughout the period of the pandemic, that certainly reinforced that view. And there's been a number of developments that will either have been implemented or will be implemented in the near future to aid and improve communication between the Council of Governors and members. So, first of all, I'd like to share with you that the Trust remains active on social media. We do find that a valuable communication tool to interact with the public and members. And indeed, Karen, our lead governor, is also very active on social media, and that is therefore a very useful channel for engagement with the population locally. The Airedale Hospital and Community Charity have recently put live a new website, and the Trust has been putting in a considerable effort in developing and overhauling its own website to make that both easier to update and also easier to navigate. And indeed, representatives of the Council of Governors have been involved in that design and review of that website to make sure it is fit for purpose and it is easy to navigate, and it's got all the essential information, looking at things through the eyes of the public and the membership of the Trust. So that new website for the Trust is due to be launched in December. I'm sure you'll all want to have a look at that, and indeed we'll publish a members bulletin when it is available, so you can look at it and give us your feedback on it. As a public body, clearly we continue to publish papers from our board meetings and Council of Governors meetings that are held in public on the website. So there's lots of information there that are available to members. And as you would expect, the nature of the Governor's activity, as Karen alluded to, has had to be shaped and operate differently because of the ongoing pandemic. Indeed, all Governor's activity had to be virtual. One of the other influences in that was actually we received as a Trust guidance from NHS England and NHS Improvement how we should operate in a pandemic, and indeed that influenced the activities of governors, what they could and couldn't do. So from the start of the pandemic, governors have been able to access and join in on the virtual weekly staff briefs. They've attended monthly update discussions with members of the board. And they've also observed board and committee meetings, as Karen said, so there's been plenty of activity from governors. They did issue an update to all Trust members in November 2020 and also February 21, and had this annual members meeting, which was originally scheduled in July and then deferred until September. Had that not been deferred twice, I'm sure there would have been an opportunity for further communications. However, those deferrals for reasons outside the Trust control has actually unduly extended the timescales between the last email update with governors. So I think it's right and proper that looking ahead with the opportunity to use the new website and integrate that into communication, that governors will want to use and engage more with the membership. So I think if I was to summarise, clearly the pandemic shaped what we could do, but equally I would hope you would acknowledge that the work that has been done in response to your question at last year's annual members meeting and the benefits of that platform will enable greater communication between the Council of Governors and members in this and the future financial years ahead. So thank you for that question, Pauline. I think it's really valuable to raise that again, to get that update, and I hope you support what we have and will do in the future to improve communication with the Trust's membership. So I'm now going to invite our Executive Director of Nursing, Amanda Stanford, to respond to the question that's in the sidebar from Peter Emsley. So as being Director of Nursing, Amanda also heads up the complaints facility within the Trust. So Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So the question I've got here from Peter, thank you, Peter, was around when we receive negative comments from patients via text, what action do we take and do we collect the data? So a couple of things from me. Yes, we take action. Action varies depending on what that comment might be. So it might be that we can contact the person directly and resolve any negative comments they may have. We always let the teams know about those negative comments, so they're fed into the clinical teams, usually via the heads of nursing and the matrons and the divisional directors and the clinical directors. And then we do collect that data, so we are rolling out the new digital friends and family test, being mindful as we do roll it out that we don't exclude anybody from that. So we're really keeping a close eye on making sure that we are not excluding people from being able to make comments. We do publish those, we take them to the board as well through our integrated board report. And we balance them out with all the positives, so it's really nicely laid out. We have a look at what those negative comments are in terms of the proportions of those against all the positives that the teams receive. And then that gets fed into either quality improvement plans at team level, at ward level, and it also can be fed into the divisions. So the way we organise our hospital is in divisions, and they are developing quality plans at the moment. And all those comments, both negative and positive, will be fed into that. Because the other bit that we really are trying to get the teams to focus on is when we get it really, really right, and people have a really positive experience, what is it that makes it positive, and what can teams do to share that across other teams to make sure that we get it right more often than we get it wrong. So I hope that's answered your question. Happy to share any more if people want to contact me directly after this. More than happy to do that, Chair. Thank you.
Brendan, Ian Barlow's question, which was submitted privately. Do you want to read the question and then the response, please?
Hi Ian, thanks for sending your question. You've called out that there are a limited number of disabled car parking spaces on the flat ground next to the outpatients entrance. And as a service user of the Trust and someone who has to use a walker, you've struggled to manage slopes. Your question is, are there any plans to increase the number of disabled car parking spaces on flat areas of the Trust? So I don't think there are any immediate plans, but it is something we can think about within our estate strategy. So thank you for raising this, because we need to consider what it means for you accessing the hospital. We've got 21 blue badge spaces outside the outpatients entrance and 54 in total across the Trust. Clearly, if we need to revisit this, we'd welcome your feedback on it. What I would say is I know Amanda would welcome a conversation with you about your experience accessing the hospital. And I'd argue Jo Harrison equally. So I talked about the well-being of our colleagues earlier. Jo and her team have led on that. Jo would be interested in hearing your views, perhaps with Amanda, so we can take this into our forums. Amy's our lead around the disability forum, but I know Jo and Amanda would definitely want to hear from you to see how we can improve on things on this. Thanks, Andrew. You're on mute, Andrew.
Apologies. So the next batch of questions, there was one submitted by Brian in advance of the meeting, which I'll respond to. I'm going to ask Amy to respond to the question from Anonymous on the property arm of the Trust, and then I'll respond to the anonymous question about public representation with disabilities. So Brian, thank you for your question. There were 3 parts to your question. I'll answer them in those 3 component parts. The first part was all around AGH Solutions. There were 3 subparts, which was, do you feel that the formation of AGH Solutions has been a success? how close is it operating to the original business plan, and how much has the company profits contributed to the actual trust? So taking the response to each of those three parts, in a word to the first one, the answer is yes. The Airedale General Hospital Solutions has been a success. Why, you may well ask in response to that? Well, that's in terms of what it was set out to achieve. The focus of the business plan when it was set up was to enhance the for people, so for colleagues. So the intention was both to improve employment terms and conditions as well as engagement for colleagues in that AGH Solutions. That has been achieved, such as now a commitment to continue to pay the living wage, and certainly from a recruitment and retention, things have improved. So for example, the leaver turnover ratio on a rolling 12-month basis was 10.1 at 31st of March 21, which is one of the lower levels that it's been. In addition to a focus on people, there was also the opportunity from setting up AGH Solutions to in-source certain services which have previously been provided in the private sector, so catering, transport, and it's been also AGH Solutions have the opportunity to work with other parts of the system and the local community on providing services, and that's also been achieved. One of the other key things that's very relevant in particular as we're in the second week of the COP26 Global Summit around environmental sustainability is that AGH Solutions has been incredibly valuable in supporting the Trust's sustainability ambition and the requirement towards a net zero carbon usage that the Trust and all parts of the NHS are working towards. So that's why overall the Trust believes that the formation of AGH Solutions has been a success, and it supported the Trust's overall ambition and objective to become an anchor institution within our community. To the point that was raised about what profits has the company contributed to the Trust, well, there are draft unaudited accounts, and I must stress they are unaudited and they are draft, that show profit for the year ended 31st of March 21 amounting to £881,000 439, so £881,439, and the comparative for the period for March 31st of 20 was 1,163,312. So yes, again, that has contributed to the overall running of the Trust. So that was the first part of the question that Brian raised. The next point was all around the theme of car parking. So when was the last review of public car parking at the Trust? How many complaints have you had about the car parking? And how much has the car parking charges contributed to the Trust in 2021? So the last review took place, or the last major review took place in 2018. However, we constantly review that, and indeed there were changes brought about by the pandemic as part of our supporting the public in that. Equally, we will continue to review it as part of our estate strategy going forward. Regarding the number of complaints that we received, in 2021 we received 3 complaints at car parking, which are a very small proportion of the overall complaints the Trust received. There was another part to Brian's question which I didn't reference, which is, have you considered reducing the charges? So we do benchmark the charges that we charge here at Airedale across the charges that are enforced by other trusts in the West Yorkshire area. And we believe that overall, as a consequence of that benchmarking, that they represent fair value. So we offer 20 minutes of free parking, which benefits over 36,000 patients a year. And during the pandemic, as I referenced in my earlier answer, there was free parking for patients and colleagues from the 25th of March 2020. And although we changed that from the 16th of October 2020, it was only charging for patients, and certainly patients had exemptions from charges. So in total, the amount that car parking charges contributed to the Trust in 2021 was £178,000. So quite a modest sum overall. So the third question that Brian asked was around Brendan Brown. so I will read it. It says, "I am really sorry that Brendan has decided to leave Airedale. During the last 3 years, he has brought in a truly professional senior management team and guided the trust through one of the most difficult periods in NHS history. He should receive some kind of award as well as a hearty vote of thanks from everyone. I would like to ask Brendan if he's leaving for ambitious reasons only or for other reasons." So I think you would acknowledge from what was said earlier to the leadership slide that we also recognise the significant contribution that Brendan's made, and we have therefore given him that hearty vote of thanks. So thank you for endorsing that and reaffirming that. Regarding Brendan's matters for leaving, clearly it's a personal matter, although Brendan did share a message to all colleagues at the time that we announced his change in role. And although I won't read that here, it will be published as part of the response. And I think it's very clear that it was a very difficult decision for Brendan. But as we referenced, it's a new role with a larger trust, and it's not that far away from us. So I would say that we're not going to see the last of Brendan, and he will continue to watch our progress with interest, just as we will monitor his with interest too. So thank you for that question. I'm now going to invite Amy to respond to the anonymous question regarding the property arm of the trust.
Thanks, Andrew. So if I've interpreted the question right, which I'm hopeful I have, I think Andrew might have part answered that at the start of his answer to the question, to the last couple of questions. So I'm thinking by the property arm of the trust that we're talking about AGH Solutions, and if that is where we're going, I think it's very clear from what Andrew said that we're not expecting there to be any extra deficit in our accounts from the activities that AGH Solutions are participating in. I think in terms of their plans, they obviously do have commercial ideas and plans that they're pushing forward on in terms of improving their business and taking their services further afield, hopefully. I think what we need to be really clear on is a lot of the things they're really involved in at the moment is the supporting the trust in our ambitions. So all those slides you've seen on the changes we're doing to the estate, etc., AGH Solutions have been absolutely integral to, including supporting the lobbying at a national level to get support for our new hospital. So I think in terms of any concern from me about the impact of their activities on our accounts, I have none at this stage, and if anything it will be positive, because as Andrew's just explained, their profit is incorporated into our group accounts in its entirety. Okay, so I hope I've answered that. Please come back to me if not with a separate question.
Thank you, Amy. So the next question was about it was from Anonymous, and it was about, do you have a public representation of people with disabilities? National figures are around 18%, I believe. So first of all, our membership database doesn't actually routinely record disabilities, and therefore people are not asked to declare them. So we're not able to report that figure with any accuracy. Clearly that's something that we can look at going forward and potentially record that going forward. On that, I've just referenced something that as a board member involved in one of our equality, diversity and inclusion groups, myself and indeed Amy Whittaker, who you just heard from, are actively involved with the Trust Disability Network. And I think even amongst the colleague body where there is a requirement to disclose, one of the challenges that we face is to actually get colleagues to disclose disabilities. That's partly because of a potential of stigma, of perhaps a fear to do it. It may be other reasons. And what we're doing is we're running a campaign on the 3rd of December to actively engage with colleagues to try and seek to enhance the environment for colleagues with disabilities and actually see what that true measure is. I think it also reflects that a number of colleagues may have disabilities that are undiagnosed because some are non-visible and non-physical. So it's a really good question. We don't have that information for our membership. We don't have an obligation to capture that, and it may be something that in a future phase we can. but equally I hope by articulating the answer that I did in respect of colleagues where we do have that responsibility, I wouldn't want the figures to be considered to be highly accurate if it's representative that in colleagues we don't believe that the numbers are accurate. It may not be too true for the public as well, so hence it may not compare to the 18% national figures that were referenced in your question. Again, feel free to come back to myself or indeed Amy or another colleague if that's something that you would like to take up further with us, but I hope we've answered your question as best we can today. So there are now on to the next batch of 3 questions. So there are one from Andrew Wilkinson that I'm going to ask Rob to cover. There's another from Brian, which I think Karen Ellison and I can perhaps cover. And then there's a final one which, although it's directed at Rob, I'm going to ask Stuart Shaw, who will, as you heard earlier, be the new Rob from the 1st of January, to pick up that one, because Stuart's actually actively involved in the health centre in Keighley. So Rob, do you want to take us through Andrew Wilkinson's comment before I pick up Brian's, and then Stuart picks up the anonymous one?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yes, so thanks for your question, Andrew Wilkinson. I should have probably mentioned this in the presentation. So yeah, absolutely. It sounds like you're a man who knows more about this kind of thing than me. So absolutely, solar and wind power will be a key part of it. And then the current plan is for boreholes for ground source heating and air source heat pumps. So I hope that means something to you. Clearly, we're going to continue to develop our plans, but we wanted to put that as a principle front and centre, for the new plan. So I hope that answers your question. There'll be lots more to come out about that as we head through these next few months. Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, so Brian's question about will it be possible to watch the governors in action with a team link for their monthly meetings? So first of all, I'd stress that the Karen referenced monthly meetings, which are they're in effect the governors' informal group, so they're informal meetings for governors. So I think that will be for all the governors, for Karen to decide whether that's something that they were happy to share. There are Council of Governor meetings that are held in public, which I, as Chair of Governors, can respond that I guess at present we're not providing that link, and so that's something that we really should do. I think potentially the new website will enable us to promote that and provide that functionality. So I would suggest it's a great question. Watch that space, and I would hope that the Council of Governors in the new year we've come up with a solution for that. So thank you, Brian. That's a really good question.
Shall I come in there as well, Andrew?
Please do, Karen.
Yeah, so we have had a couple of observers over the last few months really wanting to probably apply in the spring to be governors, and they wanted to have a look at what it was like. So, I mean, we probably can't have hundreds of people watching us, but we have got a governor informal group next week, so I'll pop it on the agenda to see what we can make of that. And maybe if you come back via the membership email address, if you're interested, we can probably facilitate some watching of us in action. Certainly. Thanks.
So last but not least, there's a question from anonymous. Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. So a group of health organisations a while back submitted a bid to the the Towns Fund regeneration funding that was made available by the government, and as part of Keighley's overall bid, we submitted a request for a grant to come together and build a purpose-built health and wellbeing centre somewhere in the footprint of the town centre. Through the Towns Fund Board, that consortium has been awarded just over a £3.5 million grant to get that work going. And as we sit here today, the next steps are that we have just short of a year to follow all the requirements of the Treasury Green Book. So for those that don't know what I mean by that, there is a very prescriptive set of things that you have to do to access that funding to be able to take that development forward. and that requires us to build a really detailed case, a business case, but that is also a plan for how that centre will look, what will be in it, how it will work from a service base, and that's going to be completed by no later than June of next year, and that will go forward for approval. And from that, plans will then start to emerge about how that centre will evolve in terms of the development itself, the building and the construction. It's a really positive thing for the communities of Keighley that we serve. It's about bringing organisations. We've heard earlier about partnerships, so there's a lot of different health and care organisations in there who will provide a much greater integrated service provision. And we're just working through at the moment with service teams what's the art of the possible in there, so that we can actually provide a bit of an extended offer, not just around current services, but health and well-being for the population in terms of public health and prevention as well. So it's hopefully for future years a really positive development with a central location that will be accessible for all and support the regeneration of the town centre.
That's lovely, Stuart. Thank you for that. So, right on time, I'm going to wrap this meeting up. So, first of all, can I thank all the presenters for their significant contribution to this annual members meeting. I'd equally like to thank all those colleagues who have been involved behind the scenes for their invaluable support and making things happen. It's really appreciated. I hope you as members have found it informative, and again I'd thank you for all your questions. We really do value your support, and I think it's been a really great interactive annual members meeting, so thank you for that. On that note, please continue to be active to be members, and indeed, why not encourage others to be members and active too? And we do hope that you can get involved in the elections that take place of members to stand for governors, and they're going to be announced earlier in the new year as to what that process is, with those elections due to take place in the spring. So on behalf of everyone, can I thank all for their contribution today. It feels to me as Chair of Board, Chair of Council of Governors, it's been a real successful annual members meeting. So thank you everybody, and we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you all again soon. Thank you and goodbye.